Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Grief Experience, Tools for Peer Support Specialists. Just a little introduction about myself. My name is Tanya Craigie. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am just a description of myself. I am a blonde woman with green eyes. I'm a white woman. Today, I am wearing a green shirt representing North Star Peer Support, which is actually a peer support agency in northern Wisconsin. I myself do not work there. However, for today's webinar, I thought that I would wear a shirt that represents the topic that we're talking about, which is grief. On the back of my shirt is some art that was designed by a young woman who is Native, and I trained her years ago as a certified peer specialist. And last year, she was going through a lot of things, some major loss in her life, and had returned to use after years of sustained recovery. And we did end up losing her. So I'm wearing this shirt today in honor and representation of my young friend. Um, in addition to that, I am a director of peer services in Madison, Wisconsin. I've served in many roles there. I came on doing direct service. My initial role there was to develop and design a program working with birthing folks experiencing substance use. And from there, it transpired into so much more to now where I have 14 different programs that I get to be a part of, working in a variety of environments from jails to hospitals, community-based programming, really centered in harm reduction and substance use peer support, although we obviously meet all folks and all their experiences wherever they are. I also like to acknowledge the circumstances that led to the forced removal of the Ho-Chunk people and honor their legacy and resistance and resilience, because I get the honor and privilege to work on the sovereign land of the Ho-Chunk Nation and the 11 other First Nations within the boundaries of the state of Wisconsin. I just want to name that many things will be discussed in this training that could be activating for many of you. Please just remember to take care of yourself, lean into your support as needed, and as much of this information can be very personal to our professional experiences as well as our personal experiences. Our learning objectives for today will be hopefully you will walk away with an understanding of what grief is. We will discuss an overview of grief practices in different cultures, and then we will also discuss strategies for addressing various griefs, whether it's in our workspace or our personal spaces. So Merriam-Webster describes grief as a deep and poignant distress caused by or as if bereavement, and B, a cause of such suffering. Bereavement is the state or fact of being bereaved or deprived of something or someone. And I really like how they name that something as well, because grief shows up in many forms and affects us all differently. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the loss of somebody permanently in our life. It can be friendships, but also it can be things in our lives that maybe we got accustomed to. Grief and loss are inevitable experience in life. And as counterintuitive as it may be, if we can learn to suffer, we tend to suffer less. So this is just a list of some of the types of losses. It is certainly not all encompassing. And this is just overall losses. I talk a little bit more later about losses in the peer relationship. But to name a few are losses of relationships, whether that is a significant other. What I've found in my own life and personal life is that oftentimes I've grieved losses of good friends, more so even than maybe some of those intimate partner relationships that I've had. Those people that really stood up for me and were a part of my life. And then for whatever reasons, we've drifted apart or things have come in between that relationship. And the grief that was involved in those has left a profound experience on my life. The loss of a pet. I have a 9-year-old who lost a a hamster a couple of years ago, and they still talk about Whamster, the hamster. Even though it's been a couple of years, it really stands out for them. Miscarriage, the loss of a child. It could be the loss of custody or placement of a child too. It doesn't have to be death necessarily. Um, and loss of a marriage or loss of a long-term relationship, loss of a job. Many of us find community and family within our workspaces. And so when we lose a job, we don't only lose income, we oftentimes lose access to folks that were a part of our lives on a daily basis. Um, Education, that can come in a variety of ways. How I've seen it is that maybe we don't pass that class and we don't necessarily get our full degree, and then maybe we have to go in a different direction. But it can also mean that, we may have gotten into trouble or, made decisions or um, return to maybe some substance use or our mental health got in the way, and then we weren't able to continue utilizing the education that we worked really hard for to be able to show up in our workspaces and use that. Chronic pain, this is near and dear to my heart. I would have never understood what it was like to grieve the loss of like mobility or the mental health that comes around and being in pain on a daily basis. So not necessarily being our happy-go-lucky selves anymore when we're really in survival mode and trying to just feel better physically so that maybe we can get out of bed or we can get out the door. And so chronic pain tends to come with some grief too, of the loss of our lives and the way that it used to look for us, and figuring out a new way to develop activities and life around our new way of feeling. Loss of a job promotion. Many of us, look forward to those things and moving forward in life. And we work really hard to maybe apply for that next step on the ladder to move us up, maybe financially or also just motivationally. And we didn't get the promotion that we sought out and worked really hard for. Obviously, like the death of a person, maybe the loss of a home. Recently, I have had a family member who has never been without housing their entire life. And they started using something about 18 months ago to help them cope with some of their losses in their life. And they have lost pretty much everything, and now they are currently without housing. And we're trying to, help them get resources, but there's some grief around that. And then if you also have pets in the home and can no longer take them with you because you don't have a regular place to stay yourself, that can contribute more so to that grief. Grief and loss of freedom, and this can be physically or also mentally, right? Loss of freedom can, really impact folks. They have a thing called trauma incarcerated syndrome, and grief comes along with that. And that is really encompassing all of these things, right? The loss of being able to connect with family members the way that you would like to, or any other support system, being able to work the way that you would like to, and do the things that you may be able to do if you were not incarcerated and out in the community to take care of yourself and get the support that you need. Some grief that I have observed in my own life, but also in many other people's lives, and is maybe loss of recovery time. And recovery is individual and whatever that means to folks. So when I talk about recovery, I am speaking to any, positive change in somebody's life that was working well for them. So it can be around domestic violence, it can be around gang violence, it can be around mental health or those substance use experiences. But returning maybe to some of those activities or behaviors or lifestyle or coping skills that in the past may have worked for us and we found a different way, and returning to some of those ways because we experienced big things can lead to that grief of recovery time. And big feelings around like, why did I do this to myself? Or what was I thinking? and really feeling alone and isolated. Loss of community, so this can show up in a lot of ways. So it's not necessarily just around communities that we live in, but it can be, recovery communities. It can be, you've made a decision to take a job promotion and it's in another state, and now you have to start all over again and find friends where you live and community activities. So that can lead to some grief in that as well. A child moving out. So that can be for, they're going off to college, or they're experiencing new things in life, and they're moving on. And there can be some grief from us, parents experiencing that. I'll be going through that in a couple of weeks, taking my child off to college, and I think it'll be a really big adjustment for my family. But also, it can be a child moving out because they maybe chose to go and live with another family member, or their other parent if there's a separation. It can be for a variety of reasons, and there's a lot of grief that can be in that. Financial changes is in anybody's life. Mostly those financial changes are detrimental, not necessarily in a positive way. Their loss of employment, or loss of or not getting that, getting the money that we need in order to survive. Inflation is insane right now. There's a lot of things going on in society, and it's expensive. And so many of us may have been able to survive on the money that we were making previously, but with the new changes, we may have to think about, like, now I have to get another job to supplement the income that I'm putting out the door. And that will take away from other things that mean a lot to me in my life, whether it's sports, other social activities, support groups, time with our families. And so that there can be a lot of grief that comes with that. Any changes in school, maybe moving, having to go to a new school, maybe adjusting to a different program in school. There can be some grief with the loss of the community there. And then I also like to add in diet changes. Um, I don't know about you all, but I really, really like food, and I like to eat what I want. And as I've gotten older, I have come to understand that I can't always eat the same things that I used to be able to eat, and my metabolism would work in my favor. So I have had some personal grief around having to maybe cut out some things that were no longer serving me, and those lifestyle changes can come with a lot of big feelings. It's important to note that a person could experience the same loss or the same type of loss, but their way of processing, healing, grieving, all of that for us may look very different from one of us to another, depending on our relationships that we've had to the person or to the situation. Grief is a very personal, complex, individualized situation. And as leaders, coworkers, and peers, we want to be able to explore our personal experiences in the peer relationship or in our own experiences with that openness, that curiosity, the compassion and empathy that I know most of us step into this space with at the forefront, in the same way that we would any other experience that someone is going through, that we're either supporting or ourselves. And we want to be mindful of assumptions and unrealistic expectations, certainly on ourselves and on others. So, the most common stages of grief uh, that is talked about oftentimes are the Kubler-Ross stages of grief. Um, it's important to note that these are not linear. They are similar to the stages of change, so they don't necessarily happen in any particular order. There's a suggested order from Kubler-Ross, but she certainly says that people can slide in and out of these things depending on their experiences. So the first one generally is like denial. Somebody is like putting off their experience, and in a lot of ways, it's a protective measure for them. So they're choosing to maybe focus on other things in their lives or distract and kind of put on the back burner that this loss has happened in their life. And as they feel more safe to feel those feelings, uh, sometimes that a lot of times those feelings will come out later in more manageable chunks, and not necessarily all at once where it seems really unmanageable to the person. The second stage in the stages of grief tends to be anger. And a person will feel a lot of frustration and helplessness in this stage. Uh, they will oftentimes maybe blame systems, they will blame the individual that may have left them, or they may blame themselves or other people in their lives. This is very common and normal part of the grief experience. Um, but it doesn't always feel the greatest if we're on the receiving end of that anger. So we're like working with a peer and they have had a loss. They may find that they feel safe enough with us to express that anger, but they also may direct that anger towards us, and we may feel some confusion and misunderstanding during those periods. The third stage is the bargaining stage. So this is more of a stage where people maybe start attempting to negotiate, whether that's with like a higher power or the universe, or again, systems and other people, to really like try to negotiate for a different outcome. So they resort to um, kind of if this, then that, and really not being able to. And this can happen not only in the loss of like people, again, going back to that list of types of losses, a lot of those things can happen, the bargaining, right? Like maybe if I go back to that employer and I say this, then maybe there'll be a different outcome. Um, and so that's very, very common part of this grief experience. Then can come depression or deep, deep sadness, um, and feelings, reflecting on the loss. And this is normal. I think it's situationally normal. Oftentimes when it's leading to like other things or goes on for many, many, many months, sometimes it's appropriate to engage in more support outside of just regular support, maybe meeting with a therapist or a more in-depth person. Some folks during this stage may decide that it would be appropriate for me to try something to help me maybe not feel so depressed. And so they may see a psychiatrist or somebody else to help them manage that depression in more of a clinical setting. And then there's the acceptance stage. So this tends to be a person coming to reality with the terms of the loss, and not necessarily saying that they're like okay with the loss. They're just learning to fill in the hole or fill around the hole that was left by the loss in their life, and they figure out a different way to live with that loss now in their life. And part of that might also be celebrating or learning to honor the person or the situation that they've lost. They're more open to maybe discussing it more and talking about the experience in positive ways, and not so much focused on like the actual loss of it, but the great memories that they may have had, and the positives in it, and really celebrating the presence of that situation or person in their life, rather than so much the sadness. Again, I like to point out that culturally, this can look a lot different, and within different cultures and communities, they can totally experience grief differently and in different stages than this. So there are many types of grief. Um, there's normal grief. This is the response that may be regular or common. So I hate to ever put a timeline on grief. I just don't think that's realistic for anybody. And so even when they say regular or common, I'm like, I think that is still like kind of placing grief in a box with the expectation that maybe within a certain time frame, somebody is going to feel better about a situation. Um, there's anticipatory grief, so the feelings or emotions that we have maybe prior to a loss occurring. So if we're supporting somebody that may have a terminal illness, we know is going to be leaving us, or a pet that has been unwell for a while, we get that in anticipatory grief. So we're already starting to grieve and think about what life is going to look like without this individual or this thing or this situation in our life before the actual loss may occur. So that can also be like our company is closing, our agency is closing, and we have a couple of months. And so already beginning to feel those feelings prior to the actual agency closing. Complicated grief. These are the big feelings and emotions that are unable to be expressed and build up over time. So if some person has experienced many, many losses in a variety of ways off that list, um, grief may be intensified or prolonged over time because they're experiencing all of that every time they experience the new grief too. So sometimes it's suggested to, maybe get with somebody who can help you process all of those things that have happened so that it doesn't seem so compounded during the next loss. And I work with communities that have experienced on a community-wide level so many losses, whether it's a number of overdoses or a number of suicides or just a number of like complicated health things because they didn't always have access to the information around wellness. And so there was a period during COVID that we were going to funerals, if we could safely attend them, once a week. And then I have another individual in my life who is on my team, and she's been to 5 funerals in the past 2 weeks, just in her community and the losses. And sometimes that's a result of community violence that is happening from where she grew up. That cumulative grief is someone who experiences those many forms in a short period of time. So having multiple losses, so maybe that can be like loss of freedom, and I lost, my grandma while I was incarcerated, and I lost my children. That can be a ton of things in a very short period, and can definitely complicate and compound that grieving process. Disenfranchised grief is grief that is not validated through normal griefs or accepted as a viable loss. One thing that really comes to mind here is that loss of a pet. I tend to live in a fairly progressive community, and I think that, when we have pet losses, I actually, my work wife right now, yesterday, she did lose, her pet of 15 years. And so it's absolutely normal in my community to be like, I'm taking time off work to take care of myself and grieve the loss of this pet. Whereas when I work in rural communities around my state, they don't always have the same societal beliefs and understanding about how these pets or things can impact our lives. And it's really kind of the old adage of, or the ideology that like you should just get over it and you should just come to work because it was just a cat. So that can be really, really hard if something that was really meaningful to us was a loss, and society or even workplace and policies and environments don't allow for us to grieve appropriately. And then there's delayed grief. So this is grief that someone suppresses in order to not feel the experience until a later time. So that kind of goes back to the 5 stages of grief and really the denial piece. So sometimes that can come up way, way later. Delayed grief can be safe for us because right now we're going through so many other things, and it doesn't feel right that I can, manage all these feelings. And if if we don't feel those feelings though, sometimes they do end up coming up sideways and showing up in ways that can be counterproductive for us. So the impact of grief, it affects us, in many, many, many ways. Obviously, the most obvious one is emotional, right? Anxiety, anger, sadness, frustration, can be, we can be isolating, and we can shut down. Physical effects, a lot of times our emotions do show up physically for us. And so it can impact us physically. The body keeps the score. And so a lot of times our pain is expressed in our bodies. But other ways is fatigue, maybe weight changes. So maybe eating our feelings and maybe gaining weight if that's a source of comfort for us during those times, or not being able to eat because our anxiety is so high and we lose weight. Um, and maybe developing our own health issues from grief, heart problems, and other challenges that could come from just not being able to take care of ourselves because we're in so much pain. Societal effects are, withdrawing from relationships. Maybe we change our routines socially. We stop doing the things that we would normally be doing. Maybe going to some of those support groups that have been so helpful for us, or meeting up with our friends because we're unable to, maybe get out of bed, or engage in social activities. Spiritual effects. So, I've definitely can relate to the questioning, beliefs, in the spiritual way. Like, if, this thing was here, why would it do these things? And so many people who have strong spiritual beliefs during times of loss, they do question those beliefs, or it can strengthen their search for meaning during those times, because it becomes very real to them. So some of the cultural experiences for grief, as I shared before, different cultures experience death and loss in different ways. Some of them look to the community and that community support. During pre-industrial times, deaths occurred frequently, and life expectancy was pretty low during that time. So when communities did experience a death, oftentimes they were not only honored and felt like a part of the family, but the whole community would experience the loss. And they would also then in turn support one another as a community. Rituals were also developed based on those experiences. And at times, these rituals could last months to years. They weren't this, Western, you get 3 days or 3 to 5 days to take your loss, and then you better show up, with bells on back to work, and put your loss, to the side because you got to be at work now. There was solidarity found in these experiences on a community level. Sometimes folks find, a way to celebrate in joyous activities during losses. So in jazz funerals, which are popular in Louisiana, through a blend of European and African practices, musicians play sad music during a procession to the burial site, and then they end with joyous music and celebration to finish up that ceremony. A widow in the Native community may wear black rags until the mourning period is over, and then unveils a new outfit of many colors underneath when they throw off their mourning clothes, to symbolize that they are done with mourning and now are available to be considered for marriage again. Um, Dramatic in the sense of the cultural experiences aren't necessarily what we would consider to be drama in our relationships or things like that, but just very, very pronounced, and really giving a lot of honor and joy and attention to these losses, and rather than just kind of going to a thing and having it be over. Lengths of time can vary too in different cultures. Some can be, like, us in the United States, we get like 3 to 5 days. But other cultures get, many, many more days and really honor however long it takes for somebody to heal, and they have many different rituals throughout that time. They can be religious, or not religious. I'm seeing more celebrations of life too in the United States rather than so many funerals. Um, it's very individual based on those cultural experiences. Oftentimes, a family is very, very involved in extended family, and it can be collective grief that is also supported in community healing. Understanding our peers' relationships to their own grief practices can help us definitely support them differently. So supporting peers experiencing grief, I think that this works both ways, right? These can work for ourselves if we may be experiencing grief, but also in supporting others as they're going through their grief experiences while we're walking alongside of them. And these are just to name a few. Mindfulness practices, so maybe doing some guided meditation or other forms of meditation. Encourage sharing as best as possible. Obviously, we don't want to push them into sharing anything more than they're willing to sharing, but being open and available during those times is really important. Regular check-ins. So maybe if I was only meeting with somebody once a week for our regular meetings, that now I'm like checking in every day or every other day, just based on what the individual is okay with. And obviously stepping back if they ask, for less engagement. Understanding our limits as well, like how much are we contributing to what it is that they're going through, and how are we managing the rest of the people that we might be working with when we have peers going through big things, such as loss in their life and other stuff. We can tend to really do a dive into their experience with them to be of support to them, and we are maybe not able to provide the same level of support for other individuals that we're currently working with, because we're so consumed with supporting this person and ensuring that they are okay. Um, and then also not taking care of ourselves during that time, not getting the appropriate sleep that we need, taking those 2 a.m. phone calls still, dropping everything when they call us. So just being self-aware of how the experience that you're supporting is impacting you. Um, we can't, again, we can't pour from an empty cup. So if we're draining ourselves while supporting a peer through this experience, then we will maybe eventually not be able to provide that same level of support. Active listening, as best as we can, showing up, validating their experiences. All of their feelings are real and they're valid, as well as ours throughout that. So identifying spaces that we can go to when we are supporting big things and it's overwhelming for us. If it's not at your agency, who are those people that you can identify that you can go and unload on and just kind of get the support that you need to, because we can experience secondary grief and secondary loss. Um, Maybe offering up resources for individuals, whether it's like grief support groups, or any support groups, or maybe meeting with a one-on-one person, any additional resources. If it's like loss of like housing and other things, like where can we get them the resources to be able to support them and retaining their sense of autonomy in their life. And providing that safe space for them to feel all their feelings and heal at the pace that they feel is appropriate for them. This is a scenario. I've obviously changed some identifying information, so that it's not, you're not able to tell who it is. But this is, I get to experience. I've been doing the work that I get to do for a little over 7 years, and so there's been so many experiences in grief and loss on our team. And so this is just one experience. Tanita had been working with Michael for 7 months. He began services with Tanita through a diversion program in which Michael was offered treatment over incarceration, as Michael had never been to treatment before. He experienced an overdose and was scared and fearful of dying, so he began working with Tanita as a part of his support system. Throughout their time, Michael got an excellent job for a major company. He completed treatment and was able to abstain from substance use on his own accord during the duration of the program. They walked together once a week for 1 to 2 hours out in the community and had very supportive relationship. That's how their support would show up. Michael was offered a very large promotion in New York. He then completed his training and to be able to take the promotion, and then he also completed the program that he was a part of and began making plans to move. Their relationship had ended professionally when the program was finished, but they continued to meet regularly as part of like the support and maintaining just their relationship, which had turned more into a friendship by the end of their relationship. They did meet for breakfast once a week to check in with one another, and then Michael did move to New York for the job. He then called Tanita when he arrived to tell her about the big city and his excitement and that he was going to go out that night and celebrate his promotion. The next day, Tanita got a call from Michael's father that he had passed away early this morning due to an accidental overdose. While he was out, he had ingested substance thinking it was something else, and it was actually, it had the presence of something different, and he had passed away. And so throughout that experience, Tanita was very, very, very sad. This was the first big loss that they've had. They've had other losses in the peer relationship, but because of the depth of this one, it really hit them hard. We have developed workplace policies at my agency to support not only if you have a personal loss in your life, but also if you have a professional loss. So it's, taking time off work if you need that. Some people grieve differently. I sometimes tend to dive right into the work that I'm doing so that I can just distract because I'm not ready sometimes to feel those feelings myself. I did personally lose my sister to an overdose last year, and it was the first year that I was unable to dive into work and have work out for me and be a big distraction. I actually just felt the feelings and took the time and shared and grieved and showed up for my family. And it was a very different experience than I had with previous grief in my life. And so we supported Tanita in being able to take time off of work for this loss. She attended the funeral or the celebration of life for Michael. And I didn't just check in with her every other day. It was every day, and we would talk about a self-care plan, and it wasn't just what are you doing for self-care and her being blanket about that. We talked about very intentional things that she was going to do for herself on a daily basis, and then the next day I would call and check in and say, how did those work for you? And she would either share like, I did do those things and I felt better, or I didn't end up doing those things, or I did some of those things and I still didn't feel better, and we would process those things. So a lot of the grief experiences in peer work are similar to the list earlier, but it can be like that loss of promotion, maybe applying for that next step and going from a peer maybe to a peer supervisor and being passed up for somebody else. That can lead to some grief and some feelings of like worthlessness and am I imposter syndrome, other things like that. Maybe the loss of a peer. We work in the streets. We have feet in the streets, so we lose peers at a higher rate than maybe some folks that are involved in services that are more treatment based and things like that, because we just meet them wherever they're at in the homeless, the encampments and other spaces. So we lose peers a lot. And each peer oftentimes has a different impact on the person providing services for them, depending on the length of time they've been working with them and maybe the connection that they had to having such similar lived experience and things like that. So it's really all different. But we have developed like a healing tree. We have a tree that we keep in the peer provider's office at our workspace, so they can decorate something in memory of that person and add it to the tree. We also have International Overdose Awareness Day event on the 31st of August every year, where we honor those that have gone before us. By means of a drug poisoning. And so uh, it's another way just to remember these things. We ask if you want to process the loss of your peer, like individually with one of us, supervisors or other support. Do you want to process it within the group? Like, what is the best thing for you? And again, each loss is going to be different. So I don't want to ever make the assumption that every time somebody loses somebody, they're either not going to want to share about it, or they're only going to want to share with me, or they're only going to want to share in the larger group. So it's really being intentional and asking through each loss what that looks like for them. Personal losses. So losses in our own lives, whether it's marriage, um, deaths in our, grandparents, things like that, children. We have family peer providers on our team too, and that they have had losses of their own children at times from drug use, and they have anniversaries, whether it's the birthday or the death anniversary. And so we as a group try to really honor those experiences based on what the peer provider shares with us and how they would like to do that. Sometimes it's celebrating, it's remembering that person, and other times it's just, I don't want anything this year, and that's okay. Ending the peer relationship can bring about grief. We've spent a lot of time with this person. We've got to watch a lot of joy in their life and successes and strengths develop. And so ending that relationship professionally can bring some grief. Always suggest processing that, within your group, or if you do group supervision, or um, getting with your supervisor, or having at least one person that you work alongside that you feel like you can trust and you can share things with. Loss of housing, I've we have like 25 peer providers, and sometimes they've lost housing. It's very expensive, to live in our community. And so we come together, and we try to support them in finding the resources and gaining the things that they need. They've maybe timed out of their recovery housing that they were living in. And so it can be a very grief experience, but the more support that we have, like maybe the softer it can go for us. Getting a health diagnosis. Maybe a person has been given a diagnosis of diabetes now, and there's some grief in that because they have to change their diet and their exercise and all of these things in order to live a different, well life and not lose maybe some limbs. And so that can be a very hard thing. Loss of resources. Our community is always shifting and growing, or taking away. So losing valuable resources in the community that maybe help people pay for their housing and other stuff like that can really, really cause a lot of exhaustion and burnout, because we're losing things that were very beneficial to the people that we were working with. Our peers experiencing losses in their lives, whatever those looks like, losses of relationships, so breakups, friendships, maybe return to chaotic use. And I mean, we have workplace policies in place that will help people keep their jobs regardless, and really try to come up with plans as best as that person wants. But that's all individual to that person, and it doesn't all look the same. But there can be some grief in that, because they're like, they have thoughts of like, oh, I was doing, so well, or, this must mean I'm not a good person anymore. And that's really not the case. Loss of like their driver's license, unpaid tickets, things like that. And so now I'm not able to provide peer support in the same way that I was before, and I have to shift the way that I'm doing it. So that can cause a lot of change in someone's life, or the loss of mobility. This dear person on our team had Been on our team for about 5 years and then had a stroke and was unable to kind of do peer support in the same way because they weren't able to walk as well and had to do a lot of like tests and things like that. And they could no longer drive their own vehicle to get to places and to take people places. And eventually they made the decision to kind of leave the space to be able to take care of themselves, which we fully support. So strategies to cope, having workplace policies in place to support grief, whatever that looks like. So, our workplace policies do not just say like close family members or extended family members. It can include, loved ones in our lives outside of, the nuclear family and aunts and uncles, as well as as well as peers. So we have workplace policies that support folks in taking time off of work for peers. We have unlimited PTO. And so that's really like, what does your mental health look like? Yeah, how do you, it's not just having PTO or unlimited PTO that matters. It's really being able to say like, no, it's okay to use the unlimited PTO. I have folks that have been with us for years and I have to like beg them to take time off of work. And there are other people that are like very good about being like, today's not a good day for me. I'm going through some stuff. I'm going to take the day. Um, Having a supportive work environment. We have, a larger team. We come together regularly because we don't all work in the same space all week. We're not in an office. We're in the streets. We're not in a space together. So, but we do create space for us to come together regularly to support one another in the hard, heavy work that we get to do. As well as like other things that are fun, not just like work. So tomorrow we're having just a kind of pulled together picnic because our normal workspace that we meet is being utilized by another agency. So we're like, okay, we're just gonna have a picnic in the park, instead. And rather than having it be like deep and, heavy, and we're gonna make it fun. Our healing tree that I mentioned, we do memory walks, memorials, Reiki or energy work. Another thing that people like to do and have found benefit from are like float tanks, regular exercise, whatever that looks like. Safe spaces to talk, really being able to identify that. And it's similar to like a crisis plan, right? So I want to develop these things before big things happen in my life. I want to be able to identify them because when I'm up a creek and I don't have those things identified, I'm not going to know where to turn. But if I pre-prepare before I am faced with some of these big things in the work that I do, I'm going to know where to turn, and it's going to be more of that knee-jerk reaction, and I'm not going to feel so alone and isolated. So really developing what our support looks like before we experience too big of things is ideal. Um, Utilizing supervision to be able to bounce things off our supervisors or get um, resources or suggestions for how to work through things. Writing and journaling is a very healing process. Group spaces, whether it's, Celebrate Recovery, Smart Recovery. There are a ton of other groups that we're developing, peer-led support groups in our community just for like drop-in. Um, they'll cover all different types of topics, whatever you bring into that space. Another big thing that our team likes to do is these rage rooms. We don't have one in our community, so we have to travel. But I know my own daughter has gone to like St. Benny's and gone out into a field and taken some old dishes and kind of just destroyed the dishes and in her own grief. And there's another practice that some folks I know have used is getting rocks and kind of writing their feelings or the people that they need to let go of or whatever in their life and writing their names on the rocks and then just kind of going out to a lake and throwing those things and kind of just shedding those things away from them. And then music is can be very therapeutic and healing. So again, back to that intentional self-care. So understanding like how we're feeling, physically, are there any needs there? acceptance maybe for some of the things that have happened, and where we are at today. A big part of acceptance for me is like being like, okay, this is just how I'm feeling, and I don't need to make myself be or do anything different than what it is right now. Um, and not feeling like we're like a burden on people or we're taking too long to feel our feelings or anything like that, but being really gentle and accepting that this is where we're at right now. Um, Figuring out like how can we experience pleasure right now when pleasure doesn't feel like it's attainable. Getting the support that we need, being able to slow down. This is a constant thing in my life, like figuring out like and reminding myself like, okay, you can't do it all, you can't be everything, and are you stopping to smell the roses? Really, really engaging in whatever community that you find is helpful for you. I have multiple communities that I get to be a part of, whether it's a gym community, sports communities, recovery communities, whatever that looks like. I have many of them, and I feel like I can get support in each one for different things. Um, Really opening up to self-care and being curious and exploring, maybe trying some new things that haven't worked before. You know, I'm sure it's talked about a lot that self-care always isn't about like bubble baths and manicures or pedicures. It's really about like what can I do today to make myself feel differently or feel better or feel okay. Um, where always being maybe aware of what we need when we need it. And that's not always safe to do when we're grieving or we're not capable sometimes to do that. We don't have that awareness. But I think what's helped me is having those trusted folks around me, that when they share things with me, such as concerns, that I am listening, because they get to help me with my blind spots oftentimes. And I trust them enough to say that when they share, like I'm concerned, that I believe them and I want to hear what they have to say. I was going to show a video, but I feel like there's not enough time, but I can put it in the chat. This is a really amazing video on self-care, and it really speaks to the work that we do and how like overwhelming it can be and how we sometimes think we're like superheroes, and if we don't like learn to really practice self-care, it can be detrimental to us and really cause burnout. And compassion fatigue and burnout are such real things that we cope with in the peer space. And I think the more that we have like workplace policies that support us in taking care of ourselves, the community established and supporting us when we're going through big things, the more that we can also feel okay and leaning into like, do I need to take some time off of work? And it doesn't always have to be like a vacation or anything like that. It can be like a staycation, right? And sometimes just taking off of work isn't enough. Do I need to take a step back from the work? And I really hate to see folks that are really impactful and powerful in this space leave this space because they just weren't being intentional about their self-care. So please, if you have time to take to watch that video, it'd be great.
80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. This principle is called the Pareto principle, or the
My thing didn't listen to me that I wasn't going to share that. So last but not least is developing workplace policies around supporting our grief experiences. So developing or having a PTO structure to support time off. We have 3 different levels of folks that work at our agency. There's like PRN, which is like pretty much 5 to 20 hours a week. Once somebody gets into more regularly, like 20 hours a week, they do get unlimited PTO as well after a certain time. I think it's 90 days. So rather than 8 hours, though, if they need time off, they get like 4 hours. And then our full time is 32 to 40 hours, and they also get unlimited time off. So having PTO in general, when I first started off in this field, in this agency, we did not have like PTO We didn't have unlimited PTO. We didn't even have like employee benefits, like healthcare benefits and stuff like that. But through advocacy and development of like programs and dollars and things like that, we've been able to support the peers in the heavy work that we do. Having like mental health days, something that I heard recently, which I thought was really cool, is just like joy days. So like I'm already feeling joyful and I don't want to like disrupt that joy by going to work. And so you can call into work and just be like, I'm taking a joy day so that I can continue enjoying my day. And I like support that. Like, yeah, so why does it always have to be like we're struggling in order to like take time off of work? Why can't it just be like it's really sunny outside and work's been hard lately and I just want to like really enjoy the sun. Processing with peers or supervisors. Sometimes that's not always possible if we are like one peer embedded in an environment where there aren't others like us. Um, there hopefully is some due diligence around developing a peer support outside of the workspace. Finding other peers that do work in your communities and in your spaces to be able to support you, because peers understand the work of peers better than most. Doing regular check-ins with folks as they are experiencing big things, extending that bereavement beyond 3 days. We now offer up like a full week if people need that. And also we don't expect that like, after that week, like everything's going to be okay. Sometimes people need to take longer leaves of absence, personal leaves of absence for a while to really just figure out how to navigate life again, and their job is going to be there waiting for them when they get back. um, Honoring that bereavement beyond the biological family. So really, our friends, and for myself, my friends have become my family. They're really more family, and so if I were to lose any one of them, it would be very, very impactful for me, and I would definitely need to be supported in my workspace, to take the time off that I need to get through that loss. Employee in supporting employee support programs. If we don't have workplace policies or can't have them, supportive, and if you're a smaller agency or things like that, really leaning into the possibility of getting employee support programs so they can be the ones that are supporting people in the workplace going through these things. And then having supported activities for healings within the workplace. We take time to remember those that have gone before us. We take time to talk about and process the things in our weekly group time, the challenges in the peer work, the grief that we're experiencing in the peer work, so that you can maybe leave it there or share it with others so that you can go about and be more supportive later. And I think that is all. Are there questions at all? Oh, there's some chat. Joy days. Why can't we be a superhero? I love that. I do think that we are in some ways, but even superheroes need days off. Anything else? Joy days, yes. Thanks, Casey. Right. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking time to spend with me today. Happy to share like my email and all that stuff if anybody wants to connect or get a hold of me through Casey. And I hope that you have a wonderful day.